We're in the midst of a study of Old Testament history. We're in the book of Genesis. We're in the life of Jacob. I want to remind you of a peculiarity in the book of Genesis, the way that it marks off its divisions. It will say, these are the generations of, or this is the account of, and it'll name a person. And as it does so, his son, or one of his sons, will be the primary character in that division. We'd read, this is the account of Terah. And Abraham, his son, was the number one person in that period of history. Now we're studying, this is the account of Isaac. And Jacob, his son, is the number one person in this time. We'll read later, this is the generation of Jacob, or this is the account of Jacob. And Joseph, his son, will be the number one person in the history. So remember that as you read Genesis. When it says, these are the generations of, or this is the account of a man, we're not really studying his life. We'll be studying the life of his son. We're in the generation of Isaac, and Jacob is the main character. We've studied two things in Jacob's life so far. We've studied Jacob as the supplanter at home. He's living up to his name. Jacob means one who supplants, or one who takes the place of another. And Jacob is not too good a character at the beginning of his life, as he steals his brother's birthright and his brother's blessing. Now it's God's will that Jacob have those, but it is not God's will that Jacob steal them. So he has to leave home for 20 years because of his stealing, because of his deception, because of his crookedness. And he serves for 20 years his mother's brother, his uncle, Laban. And he is really equal to Jacob. He tricks Jacob. Jacob works for 7 years to get Rachel. Instead, he gets Leah. Then he gets Rachel and has to work another 7 years. Then he has to work 6 years for his portion of his father-in-law, his uncle's flocks. So he has to serve Laban for 20 years and makes Laban a rich man, as well as leaving with a good portion of Laban's flocks and his 2 daughters and 11 sons and 1 daughter. Now then we're going to study, that's the servant, as he serves in Padan Aram, his father-in-law. He has been a supplanter and he's been a servant. But now he's going back to be head of the house. Now he's going back to be the spiritual leader of the seed of Abraham, the one who is going to possess all promised land and bruise the devil's head and bless all mankind. We can't have him do that as a supplanter. He can't really do that as a servant to his father-in-law. So the third part of Jacob's life is he becomes the saint, the holy one, the separated one, the chosen one from God. And since he lives at Hebron, we're going to call him the saint at Hebron. And in this particular lesson, we're going to see the supplanter become the prince of God. We're going to see the crook become the saint. Open in your Bibles in the book of Genesis to Genesis chapter 32. And my heading here says, Jacob prepares to meet Esau. And that's all right. But in reality, I would call this chapter, Jacob meets God. Read with me in chapter 32 of Genesis, verse 1. Jacob also went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, this is the camp of God. So he named that place Mahanaim, which simply means 2 camps, his camp and God's camp. So God is indicating to Jacob again that he's with him in this journey. Laban has come and kissed his children goodbye, searched for the household gods and did not find them, for Rachel had hid them. He's gone back to Padan Aram, and Jacob is going back to God's land, the promised land. And God wants him to know he's not alone. Not only does he have the camp of all of his house, but God sent angels to be with Jacob, so he would know that God is going with him. But now Jacob knows he's going to have to meet Esau. 20 years ago, Esau pledged to kill Jacob. And Jacob still is aware of Esau's profane character. Therefore, he will perhaps still be angry enough to kill Jacob. So in verse 3 of chapter 32, Jacob sent messengers ahead of him. Here we're going to find out that he's preparing to meet Esau by sending messengers. Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He instructed them, "This is what you're to say to my master Esau." Look at the humility of Jacob. "Your servant," Jacob says, "I have been staying with Laban, and I've remained until now. I have cattle and donkeys and sheep and goats, men servants and maid servants. Now I'm sending this message to my Lord, that I might find favor in your eyes." When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, "We went to your brother Esau, and now he's coming to meet you. And 400 men are with him." That doesn't look like a brotherly greeting. That looks like to Jacob that Esau still intends to kill him, because he's coming out with a small army to meet him. In fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, or camps. And the flocks and the herds and the camels as well. He thought if Esau comes and attacks one group, the group that is left may attack. So now he is prepared to meet Esau. He tried, in his own way, to get it where Esau would come and meet him personally. Esau may be a little concerned about this tricky brother. Maybe this brother is trying to get him out into the desert to kill him. And so he comes with protection. 400 men. But now Jacob does what he should have done to start with in verse 9. He prays. He prays unto Jehovah and says, O God of my father Abraham, O Lord, who said to me, go back to your country and your relatives, and I'll make you prosper. I'm unworthy of all the kindnesses and faithfulness you have shown to your servant. Notice again his humility. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I've become two groups. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I'm afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you've said, I will surely make you prosper, and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered. He not only prays, he wants God to remember that God is covenanted, that he will prosper him and help him and protect him. He spent the night there. From what he had with him, he selected a gift for his brother Esau. He's still a little bit of Jacob, still not totally trusting God. He's trying again to curry Esau's favor. Here's what he sent him. 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 female camel with their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. He put them in the care of his servants, each herd by itself, and says to his servants, go ahead of me and keep some space between the herds. So Esau is going to come on these things one at a time. He instructed the one in the lead, when my brother Esau meets you and asks, to whom do these belong and where are you going? Who owns all these animals? Then you say they belong to your servant Jacob, and they are a gift sent to my lord Esau. He's coming behind us. And he told the second, and he told the third, and he told all the others to say the same thing. So Jacob's gifts, verse 21, went ahead of him, but he himself spent the night in the camp. He's still getting ready to meet Esau. And he's afraid. He's distressed. So he not only prays to God, he sends bribes, gifts ahead of him. That night, he learns where the power is. We have here the lesson of him wrestling with a man that later he believes to be God. Verse 22, chapter 32. That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. Now the Jabbok is a little river that flows east out of the Jordan, a little over halfway between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all of his possessions. So Jacob was left alone. He's still on the east side of the Jordan. And a man wrestled with him till daybreak. All night long, he wrestles with this man. When the man saw he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip. so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. The man said, "Let me go, for it's daybreak." Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man said, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered, "supplanter, crook." Then the man says, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel." Now that word means one who has power with God. "Because you have struggled with God and with men and have overcome." There's a name change because there has been a character changed. A proud, young crook left promised land. A mature, righteous man has come back. Jacob says, "Please tell me your name." He said, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, which means the face of God, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face and my life was spared." Now, in theological terms, this is what's called a theophany, which means God in a human form. God has come down and as a man has wrestled with Jacob all night long. The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. That's true in the time Moses wrote Genesis, and that's true today. That part of the animal is not kosher. That part of the animal cannot be eaten. It is to remind Israel, not just Israel the man, but Israel the nation, that God is Jehovah, that he is the one that is to be honored. Now Jacob meets Esau. The two brothers come back together. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau, coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maidservants. He put the maidservants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, Rachel and Joseph in the rear. I think that was the order in which he loved these people. He himself went on ahead. Now the old Jacob would have got behind them all and hidden. Israel goes ahead of him. He went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. Again, note his humility. Note his changed character. He's not trying to gain something from Esau. He's trying to be acceptable to Esau. I love verse 4 of chapter 33. The years that Jacob has been away from Esau has turned the dagger in Esau's hand to a kiss from Esau's lips. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. There's reconciliation. Esau knows that he probably has learned through the years that he is as much to blame for what has happened to him as Jacob is. His profane nature, Jacob's crooked nature, has worked together to get the will of God done. And Jacob has the blessing of Abraham, and he has the birthright of Abraham. Esau looked up and saw the women and saw all the children. He says, "Whose are these with you?" Jacob answered, "They are the children God has graciously given your servant." Notice again his humility. He's honoring God. Then the maidservants and their children approached and bowed down. Next, Leah and her children came and bowed down. Last of all came Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down. Now this is all for us to understand, that the promise made, or the prophecy made, when these two boys were in the womb, that the elder would serve the younger, is definitely not the two boys, but the two nations. Esau said, "What about all these animals that I met?" Jacob said, "These are to find favor in your sight, O Lord." Esau said, "I've got enough." Esau didn't need anything but a pot of beans, and he's satisfied. He said, "I already have plenty, my brother. Keep all this for yourself." "No," Jacob said. "If I've found favor in your sight, then accept these from my hand." Look at the latter part of verse 10. "For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you've received me favorably." Now understand about the wrestling. When God wrestled with him, he's getting him ready for this day so that he can look upon his brother, not now as someone to trick, not now as someone to deceive and rob, but as if he were God himself. Esau accepts the gift now because he knows it is truly a gift and not a bribe. He says, I'll go along with you now. Jacob says no. Said, the children are tender, and many of the flock have young, and if I drive them hard, one day they will all die. I've got to move along at the pace they can. You go on ahead of me, and I'll see you in Seir. Esau said, well, let me leave some of the men with you. And Jacob again says, no, just let me find favor in your sight. I'm able to take care of all this. So Esau went back to Seir, and Jacob went to Succoth that night, built booths, stayed there, and finally gets back into the land in verse 18 and settles in Shechem. Now I want you to, before I go on there, his settlement in Shechem in verse 18, I want you to remember what's happened so far. He's left his father-in-law behind. He has learned that God is with him, with the angels there. He has learned that he is the Prince of God. He has power with God as his name is changed from Jacob to Israel. He has humbled himself before Esau, who earlier he had deceived and defrauded and robbed. The two brothers have been reconciled, and now Jacob is going to be settling again in Promised Land. And he does that in verse 18, where he settles in Shechem. After Jacob came from Padan Aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem. That's where Abraham had been, between Ebal and Gerizim in Canaan, and camped within sight of the city. He bought a plot of ground where he pitched his tent for 100 pieces of silver, and he built an altar. That's the first time that I've read that in Genesis. Jacob pitched an altar. Abraham always did. As soon as he got anywhere, he pitched an altar. Jacob has now become Israel, the son of Abraham. And he pitches an altar and calls it El Eloha Israel, which means the mighty one, the mighty God of Israel. The Shechemites had a man there named Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, and he looked at Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved her, or he liked her. And the text says in verse 2, he saw her, he took her, and he violated her. He raped the girl. But he didn't just walk away. Verse 3 says his heart was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the girl, and he spoke tenderly to her. Then Shechem said to his father Hamor, give me this girl as my wife. He's done a foul deed, an evil deed. There's no doubt about that. But it was out of love and not lust that he did it. And he wants this lady, not just as a sexual thing. He wants this lady to be his wife. Now Jacob hears that his daughter's been defiled, and he keeps it to himself until his sons come in from the field, and he tells them. But the father of Shechem, Hamor, comes and says, my son is drawn to your daughter, and he wants her to be his wife. I pray, let him have her as his wife, and I will give you anything you ask for a bridal gift. And all of this land that is before you can be yours. I want my son to marry your daughter. Now Jacob, I don't know what Jacob thought. I do know what his sons thought. His sons were still incensed in their pride that their sister had been violated. So deceitfully, they say to Hamor, it's not right for us to give our daughter to an uncircumcised man. If you will be circumcised, not just Shechem, the son of Hamor, but if all of the people of this land will be circumcised, then Dinah can become Shechem's wife. Now, they don't intend to do that at all. They do not. It seems good unto the people that would be done. And all of the people of the land are circumcised. The third day, while the men are sore, while the men are weak, Simeon and Levi, two of Jacob's sons, the second son and the third son of Jacob, take their swords, attack the people, and kill every single male in all of that city and in all of that country. They take their wives and their daughters as slaves. They take their flocks and their herds as perhaps what they would think would be right for Dinah being defiled. When Jacob hears of this, he is terribly angry. He calls his two sons in and says, "You've made me odious." All this in chapter 30, all this chapter 34. Said, "You've made me odious. You've made me smell in the nostrils of all the people of the land. They will probably now come against us and kill us, for they outnumber us." And his brothers very haughtily say, his sons, very haughtily say in verse 31, "Should he have treated our sister like a prostitute?" Well, of course, the answer to that's no. But the question is, had he? Had he treated their sister like a prostitute? I'm not justifying what he did, of course, and neither is Jacob. What Shechem did was a foul and terrible deed. But he'd not treated that girl like a prostitute. He'd not just walked away and left her bleeding. He'd not put some money down in front of her and walked away. He had pledged himself. He had pled for her to be his wife. Of course, he'd done wrong, but he wanted to do the best he could with the wrong that he has done. And he deeply loved this girl. In chapter 35, there are a lot of lessons we could learn, and we just don't have time to stop. Maybe another time. In chapter 35, Jacob returns to Bethel. You remember when he got the vision of the ladder, the angels ascending and descending upon that ladder? When he got that vision, he had told God that if God would be with him, he'd come back here and pay the tithe. And he does that in chapter 35, verses 1 to 7. He does what he promised he would do. On the way back from Bethel to Hebron, Rachel is giving birth to a child. And she is in terrible pain and about to die as the child is being born. And the maiden that's there says, "Do not be afraid, for you will have another son." She'd called his name Joseph, which had pleaded for another son through all these years. But as she's giving birth, she's dying. And so she names the son in verse 18 of chapter 35, Benoni, which means the son of my sorrow. Jacob will have none of that. He says, call his name Benjamin, which means the son of my right hand. That's where Rachel had always walked, at the right hand of Jacob. And he wants this son to walk now where his mother had walked, at the right hand side of Jacob. 11 sons born outside of Promised Land. One child born in Promised Land, Benjamin. But Rachel dies and is buried. And to this day, as Moses writes this book, that's called Rachel's tomb. Interesting thing occurs in chapter 35. Reuben, in verse 22, goes in and sleeps, commits adultery with his father's concubine Bilhah, and Israel heard of it. Why is that mentioned? You'll find out in chapter 49. Nothing is mentioned that is not either significant in the context where it's found or in a later context. So Jacob now is back in the land. All of his sons are around him. He's living in Hebron. His 12 sons are listed throughout in verses 23 through 26. And Jacob dies, beginning in verse 27. Isaac dies, not Jacob. Isaac dies. Jacob came home to his father Isaac in Mamre, near Kirath Arba, that is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had stayed. Isaac lived 180 years. Then he breathed his last and was gathered to his people, old and full of years. And his sons, Esau and Jacob, buried him. Jacob was born when Isaac was 60 years old. That means Jacob is 120 years old at the end of chapter 35. Chapter 36 is Esau's descendants. Has really no important significance here. It's simply a statement of all of Esau's children. And the significance is the last verse of chapter 36. This was Esau, the father of the Edomites. Jacob lived in the land where his fathers had stayed, the land of Canaan. Jacob occupies Canaan, and just south of it is the country of Edom, and Esau occupies that territory. There's one more incident, one more part of Jacob's life, but that'll be all the way over in chapters 46 through 50. What happens then between chapter 36 and chapter 46? Well, I read of that in verse 2 of chapter 37. This is the account of Jacob. Now we're about to go to one of Jacob's sons, Joseph. And that'll be the story for our next 4 lessons. Now when Jacob gets down into Egypt, years later, we'll find that Jacob is there to stand before Pharaoh and bless him. He's there to stand before the 2 sons of Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim, and bless them. And he's there to stand before his 12 sons and bless them. And he's there to stand before Jehovah and be blessed by God at the end of his life. I think it's a beautiful story to read, beautiful story to think about, that Jacob, the one who started out the deceiver, has become the one that is now the humble, blessing, and blessed servant of God. So in our lives, no matter how we start out, no matter what wickedness or deception we practice at the beginning of our life, we need to find our day with God and wrestle with him until our name is changed to Israel, the one who in striving has power with God. May you find, and may I find, that power today.